Hi everyone, welcome back to another video, and today we have yet another episode of redrawing classical paintings in my style, and today's is very crazy, I'm not gonna lie. This guy really was wilding out in the 16th century, and I only just found out about it. I actually put up a poll on my Patreon this time around for my patrons to pick which one I should do this time, and my patrons picked Bacchus by Caravaggio, so that's the one I'm going to be doing in today's video. And if you guys would like to sign up to my Patreon so that you can get in on those polls to pick which one I'll do next, then the link will be down there in the description as per usual. And as I said, this one is really wild. He's probably the craziest artist that I've talked about so far in the series, so strap in. And I really like how the drawing itself came out, which is also a plus. And yeah, I will just get into it, I guess. So, as I said, today we're going to be redrawing Bacchus by Michelangelo Caravaggio. As usual, I'll be doing the redraw and intermittently talking about my process while giving you all a little background on this painting, as well as the artist, who, by the way, is wild, as I said. So, let's begin. As usual, all the sources and references I used for this voiceover will be listed in the description below, in case you'd like to go read up some more on this painting. So as I begin the sketch for this redraw here, let's get into the specifics about this painting. The painting Bacchus is an oil and canvas painting done in 1598 by Michelangelo Medici, also known as Caravaggio. This painting is a whopping 95 by 85 centimeters in size and is currently being exhibited at the Uffizi Museum in Florence. I actually got the pleasure of seeing this painting live when I visited Florence a few years back, I think 4 years ago. And it was on the same trip that I saw the Birth of Venus, as you might recall from that episode in the series. In that video, I already went on and on about how amazing of a museum the Uffizi is and how much I recommend everyone try to go visit at some point in their life, but it really truly is incredible, and this amazing painting is home to it as well. Before we get too into the painting, I wanted to give a bit of a backstory on Caravaggio himself and a bit about his life. Although his life may have been short, Caravaggio's life was not at all tame or boring in the slightest. NationalGallery.org actually describes the painter as, quote, arrogant, rebellious, and a murderer, end quote, which in and of itself is already a very big statement to make, but it is true. Caravaggio is probably not someone you'd want to hang around during his time alive. So as mentioned before, Caravaggio's birth name was Michelangelo Medici. He was born in 1571 in a town in Lombardy, Italy called, get this, Caravaggio. So later in life, he actually chose the name of his hometown as his artistic name, which is why a lot of us don't even know that he was actually just another Michelangelo among probably millions at the time. Although born in Caravaggio, he spent a lot of his childhood in Milan, where his major domo and architect father had a workshop. After Milan's bubonic plague outbreak, Caravaggio and his family have moved back to Caravaggio, and this is going to get confusing because they're all the same name. So they moved back to Caravaggio to escape the disease, but still within 6 months, Caravaggio had lost every male member of his family to the Black Death. Some say that his temperament and tendency to lash out might have stemmed from this traumatic start to life. There is not much more information actually regarding Caravaggio's childhood, besides him doing an apprenticeship with a small Milanese master, Simone Peterzano. But given Peterzano's expertise in fresco painting, a technique that Caravaggio never really mastered, it seems unlikely that he paid more than a rudimentary attention to his studies, end quote, writes the Britannica. So yes, he did an apprenticeship with this small town master, but he actually didn't really pick up anything from him since he never actually used any of the techniques that he used. So at the age of 21, he moved to Rome, also known as the epicenter of arts at the time, just like many other aspiring artists at the time, hungry to learn and work in this creative field. Unfortunately, he struggled for a while. At first, he focused his work on still life of fruit and flowers, which then evolved into half-length portraits, like his other painting, The Boy Bitten by a Lizard, as these were artworks that would sell commonly on the streets. It wasn't what he wanted to be doing, but it was what paid the bills at the time, which is very inspirational. It's hustle. But shortly after, he had a big break. Cardinal Francesco del Monte, a man of great importance at the time, saw Caravaggio's work and saw talent and potential in him. He subsequently took him into his own home. With a powerful and reputable connection now, Caravaggio started getting his first commissioned works, and he did such an amazing job, in fact, that this skyrocketed his career almost overnight. He was now pretty much considered a celebrity painter. So yeah, things were going well for him. Caravaggio was in Rome, getting lots of work and getting through these commissions at a lightning speed. He loved to work, but he also loved to party. And he really did love to party. Quote, "After a fortnight's work, he will swagger about for a month or two with his sword at his side and a servant following him from one ball court to the next, ever ready to engage in a fight or argument, with the result that it is most awkward to get along with him," end quote, according to one of his biographers. And yes, swords were illegal at the time, much like guns are, so you had to have a permit to carry them, which Caravaggio did not. He was arrested several times for all kinds of assaults, disturbances, and disruptions. A small list included, quote, slashing the cloak of an adversary, throwing a plate of artichokes at a waiter, scarring a guard, and abusing the police, end quote, says thenationalgallery.org. So, yeah, he was a bit of a wild one. In 1606, he went as far as sword fighting a man over a very mundane argument, apparently about a game or a woman, and ended up stabbing him. The man had succumbed to his wounds, and Caravaggio was now labeled a murderer. Instead of being arrested, he instead fled from Rome in hopes that he would soon be pardoned for his crimes, as he had a plan in mind. And Caravaggio's short temper and spontaneity did not stop at his nightlife. He would paint directly onto the canvas without any sort of preparation. He would, a lot of times, abandon a painting altogether if it wasn't turning out as well as he wanted, and he would just paint another right on top of it. At least he recycled canvases, you know? He was largely criticized and judged for using common people with, quote, irregular, rough, and characterful faces, end quote, as models for the biblical saints that he would paint, and put them into very modern surroundings, or, well, modern for that time. A lot of critics would say that he would do this deliberately in order to make his viewers feel like they were taking part in the biblical events of the pieces, much like in his Supper at Emmaus painting. Caravaggio, as you'll recall, had fled to Malta, where he tried to become a knight in order to receive a pardon from the Pope back in Rome. He had offered a painting of the beheading of St. John as a bribe to get in, and although this did work, and he did get accepted into knighthood, his actual plan didn't really work out for him, as he simply could not stop himself from getting into fights with other knights, and this subsequently got him in prison. But then he escaped from prison and was merrily expelled from the Knights Order. So that was his adventures in Malta. While he was out fighting more people in bars in Sicily, some very important friends of his back in Rome, because as you'll remember, he was still a celebrity painter and very, very highly regarded back in Rome, his friends managed to get a pardon from the Pope for Caravaggio, and he was now allowed to return there. So, Caravaggio packed all of his things onto a ship that actually ended up sailing off without him, as he was yet again arrested for a petty crime. So now, shipless and possessionless, Caravaggio bought his way out of jail and set off for Rome along the coast. He ended up contracting an illness along the way that was most probably malaria, and after a few days in 1610, alone and feverish, he died. Caravaggio's success was often clouded by his personal life and criminal background, having made many, or most actually, of his compelling works, and being at the peak of his career when he was a fugitive from the law. He was also suspected to be gay, which further added to his rebellious and outsider persona that people saw him as. Most critics attribute Caravaggio's almost claustrophobic compositions and theatrically brute depictions in his paintings to his upbringing in Malta. At the time, after the plague, as you'll recall, Malta was dominated by a Catholic revival archbishop that instilled ideologies of poverty and humility in the image of Jesus Christ as a form of repenting the parish from the abyss of sin. Quote, that was that nasty, nasty plague. So basically, he was telling everyone in the parish that they had fallen into an abyss of sin, which is why God had put the plague down on them, and the only way for them to repent themselves was to live life more in the image of Jesus as a poor, humble man. This Archbishop, Charles Borromeo, liked art that resembled, quote, more visceral and naturalistic traditions of folk art, end quote. Growing up around these religious and artistic influences were probably what began to shape Caravaggio's work into what we know it as today. And that's pretty much it for the life of Caravaggio himself. A very intense, deranged, and tumultuous life he led, where he somehow managed to find enough downtime to make all these incredible paintings that he did. With that said, let's get into the painting I'm redrawing today, Bacchus. If you'll recall, I mentioned earlier that when Caravaggio initially moved to Rome, he had it rough and did a series of half-length portraits, such as Boy with a Basket of Fruit, and of course, Boy Bitten by a Lizard, how could we forget? And Bacchus was part of this era of portraits that Caravaggio painted. This one in particular was commissioned by his patron Cardinal del Monte as a gift for the Grand Duke of Tuscany, Ferdinand I, and was painted between 1596 and 1597. A little backstory, in case you don't know, Bacchus, aka Dionysus, is the Greco-Roman god of fruitfulness and vegetation, quote, especially known as a god of wine and ecstasy, end quote, as written by the Britannica. So he's that vino god that we all love. He is usually depicted with an ivy wreath, the tyrsus, which was just a staff, and the cantharos, a two-handled goblet. In early art, he was depicted as a bearded man, like most of the gods, quote, but later was portrayed as youthful and effeminate, end quote, like Caravaggio did in his paintings. In the painting, Bacchus is offering the viewer a glass of wine with his left hand, which led most people to believe that Caravaggio used a mirror and his own reflection for this piece. And apparently, he did have a very complex setup of mirrors in his studios to paint his subjects onto the canvas, and did very often use himself as reference. Like in a lot of his paintings, there is no background behind Bacchus, king. Caravaggio liked to focus his paintings on the humanity of the subject, although he is a god, rather than on flamboyant detailing. So very, very different from the painting that I did before this one, which was The Swing, which was in a Rococo style, which very much focused on flamboyant detailing. Interestingly, I found out that a recent restoration of the painting showed, quote, the outline of a man's face in the jug of wine in the foreground that is believed to be the self-portrait of the artist, end quote. As established earlier, Caravaggio was no stranger to painting over the top of unfruitful paintings and sketches, so this is probably what happened here. He probably did a self-portrait of himself in the corner of the canvas and then ended up just painting Bacchus on top of it, which I think is really cool. Caravaggio.org explains that, quote, Caravaggio's inspiration was one of the many surviving statues of the Emperor Hadrian's beloved Antinous, who was often represented as Bacchus, end quote, and that, quote, the pose seems derived from a frescoed Bacchus painted by Federico Zuccaro during 1584 and 1585 in a lunette in the studio of his house in Florence, end quote. As you can see, even the great masters of art used lots of reference from other artists, including sculptures and sketches from each other, to create their big, beautiful paintings. Caravaggio.net also describes the painting as, quote, Bacchus in his youth, relaxing while holding a goblet of wine and inviting the viewer to partake in drinking with him. He's wearing a draped robe and vine leaves and grapes in his hair, end quote. There are also some nods to his still life era back in the day, with the fruit bowl and the goblet of wine in the foreground, with some hints of, quote, corruption, end quote, as Caravaggio.org puts it, such as the spoiled apple with the wormhole and the overripe pomegranate with the fruit bursting out of it. I actually did not include this, quote, corruption fruit in my version of events because I thought they were just like shadows from what I could tell, but apparently there are lots of holes in the fruit and things like that. But all my fruit is nice and ripe and fresh. Other than that, the painting is quite straightforward and was one of the first paintings to jumpstart Caravaggio's celebrity painter career in the 16th century. So yes, as you can see, I tried to keep it very one-to-one in my redraw, of course adding my own stylistic flares to it. I feel like I made him look even more youthful and jovial, but I really just like, you know, drawing really youthful and plump faces. When I went into this, I was like, oh, this one's gonna be nice and quick. It's just a portrait. It's my creme de la creme. But very quickly I realized how wrong I was because of all of the fruits that I had to render and all of these little drapes of clothing that I had to draw out. And all of the little drapes and folds of clothing that he's got going on. So there was a lot of rendering that I had to do that wasn't immediately clear to the naked eye, so I was, god, yeah, it took me a lot longer than I was expecting. But it was very fun to do. There was a lot of leaves, so I got to practice all of my leaf drawings and doing a lot of like drawings of little vines and so many grapes to render. I thought it'd be a great idea to add a light source to every single grape and do lighting and shadows to all of them, and also some rim lighting because why not? And other than that, it was actually quite a fun painting. It was very colorful, had a lot of different colors on the leaves and the fruits and stuff, so it was quite new to the series because I feel like a lot of the paintings I do on the series end up being quite muted and dark, and I got to have a lot of fun with colors in this one. As you can see here, I was just rendering the fruit bowl in the foreground and just kind of going wild with all the little details because there's a lot of textures at play here. There's all these kind of crunchy leaves and these more juicy leaves, and then there's the grapes, and then there's the different fruits and obviously all the fabrics in the background. So it was definitely a lot of fun trying to render and depict all of these different textures in this painting. And as you saw earlier, I did use various different brushes for this. I don't usually use any other brush except my round wet sketch brush from Bluesssatan's brush set, and I actually used the Nico roll brush in this one quite a lot because I wanted to include those little textures in the table that's in the foreground, in the background as well, and I ended up using it for a lot of shading. I did used to use the Nico roll brush quite a lot a few years back in my digital art, and then I just stopped using it for some reason. But using it in this piece actually reminded me that I really like it. So I think that the effect that it gave to the shadows and stuff on the table ended up looking really cool. So yeah, I also had a lot of glass to render for this piece, which I was very grateful for all of the recent drawings that I've been doing of just different flowers and bouquets of flowers in glass jars, because that in part gave me a lot of practice for all of the glass I had to render in this. And close to the end here, I wanted to add a little bit of rim lighting to him, or some backlighting, because I thought that he was being a little bit swallowed by the background and I wanted to kind of make him pop a little bit more. So this is the final version of my redraw of Bacchus by Caravaggio. I really enjoyed this one. It's so bright and so colorful, and I'm really happy with my rendition of it. It's obviously got my little flares of my style. Let me know which bit was your favorite to watch me render. It definitely had a lot of different elements that I had fun playing around with. And yeah, thank you so much for watching me redraw this classical painting. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it. Let me know your thoughts on this guy's crazy life. Would you want to be friends with him? I don't think I would be. As per usual, all the links to everything are in the description, including my online shop where I sell prints of the drawings that I do on this series. They have like gold and like really pretty metallic foils on them. I've got all of them printed out so far, except for this one in this video, obviously. But yeah, you can find them on my shop. My shop is actually closed until the 1st of November, but once it's the 1st of November, it will be open and I'll be taking Christmas orders. Link down there. I'll be doing yet another poll over on my Patreon so that my patrons can pick which one I'll do for the next episode. So if you'd like to sign up to the lowest tier, which is the one that gets you access to all the polls and everything, that link will be in the description. It's the cherry tiers. And thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye-bye!